Money, money, money. They say that knowledge is power. I used to think so, but now I know what they meant is money, stated Byron. It has been said that the love of money is the root of all evil, said Sam Butler. Lack of money is the root of all evil, retorted George Bernard Shaw. Money corrupts, money is power, and money talks. And when placed in the context of political action committees and the use of money to finance congressional races, Common Cause listens. Common Cause's top organizational priority this year is the congressional campaign finance reform issue. This will involve continued highlighting of abuses in the current system and a major effort around the country to work with other groups to drive home the need for congressional campaign finance reform. Common Cause is one of the prime sponsors and supporters, of the Boren-Goldwater Amendment, which would, for the first time, place an overall aggregate limit on the amount of money a congressional candidate could accept from political action committees. Between 1974 and 1984, the number of PACs grew from 608 to 4,000, and the amount of contributions grew from 12.5 to well over 100 million. Our speaker, Ann McBride, argues that the PAC system is one in which special interest groups are buying access, influence, and ultimately results in Congress. Ann McBride is Senior Vice President of Common Cause. Among her major responsibilities are the management of Common Cause's Capitol Hill lobbying strategies and its nationwide grassroots field organization. She joined Common Cause in 1972 as a volunteer and became a staff member in 1973. Ms. McBride has specialized in ethics in government issues for most of her 12 years at Common Cause and was the organization's chief lobbyist in the development and passage of the Ethics in Government Act of 1978. Before joining Common Cause, she was Director of Community Resources and Inner City Community Action Project in Washington, D.C. Between 1970 and 71, she traveled through Europe, Asia, and Africa on a writing assignment for the National Observer. She is a native of Louisiana, attended Louisiana State University and the University of Maryland. Members and guests of City Clubs, please join me in welcoming Ann McBride.
Thank you very much. I've never been to Oregon before, and all people told me to do was to bring an umbrella. And here we have this spectacularly beautiful day, and I've got to get on a plane this afternoon and fly back to the snowy east. But I just want to thank you for having me here, and I can tell you I sure am going to come back. Because Common Cause is for full public disclosure, there are two things I have to confess to you at the outset of this. The first thing was mentioned in my introduction. I am here in Oregon to talk about ethics in government, clean campaigns, and I'm from Louisiana. Now, when Earl Long was governor of the state, a reporter asked him at the press conference, said, "Governor, should ethics be used in politics?" Earl Long said, "Hell yes, use anything you can get your hands on." The second thing I have to confess to you is that my husband has spent much of his adult life raising campaign funds. Senator Russell Long, for whom he used to work, said to him once, "Charlie, I don't get it. I just don't get it." Ann is out there doing everything she can to change the campaign finance system. You're out there trying to get your hands on every campaign dollar that you can. How do you do it? He said, "It's easy. Ann shakes them up, I shake them down." But I have to tell you that the problem we face in this country today is not a light one, it's not a funny one. We are headed into an election where thousands of political action committees are going to give congressional candidates way over $100 million. And as Majority Leader Robert Dole has said, when these PACs give money, they expect something in return other than good government. In fact, I submit to you that our representative form of government is under siege. And I don't say this lightly. It is under siege because of the destructive role that political action committees, PACs, are playing in the political process. I certainly don't have to tell this group that our country is founded on the concept of representation. We elect leaders who are supposed to go and weigh all of the competing and conflicting interests that represent the wonderful diversity that this country is about, and then to decide what, in their judgment, best advances the interests of the citizenry. It's obviously a rough system. It doesn't live up to the ideals that you and I would like it to at all times. But we continue to freely place our trust in it because we believe that the best chance we have of governing ourselves lies in obtaining the best judgment of our elected officials. Increasingly, this is not happening today. We're not obtaining the best judgment of our elected officials in Congress because they're not free to give it to us. PACs, through campaign contributions, are creating a higher obligation for our representatives. And representatives are becoming so dependent on those contributions that they're rapidly losing the ability to represent the constituencies that elected them. Senator Barry Goldwater, who's a very outspoken opponent of PACs, recently expressed his deep concern about what PACs are doing to our democratic system. He said, "To make representative government work the way the framers designed it, elected officials must owe their allegiance to the people and not to the wealth of special interest groups who speak only for the fringes of the whole community." Now, I'd be naive to tell you that this is the first time money has been used to try and buy political outcomes. We know that money has been used forever to try and buy outcomes. In fact, I think it probably started, in a cave about the dawn of civilization. But in this country, we've long struggled to prevent money from being used to influence government decisions because buying influence goes against the grain of everything we believe in, because it violates, as Americans, our most fundamental values. And that's why Watergate was so repugnant to us. It was our nation's greatest political scandal, and among other things, it revealed that our government was literally up for sale. But the nation's greatest political scandal led to one of the nation's most historic reforms, the public financing of presidential elections. Under presidential public financing, limits were placed on contributions, on spending, and an alternative source of money was provided from the voluntary dollar tax checkoff. Simply stated, the presidential system is one that works. Since 1976, 34 of the 35 major presidential candidates have voluntarily participated in public financing, including President Ronald Reagan in his 3 bids for the presidency. The Bipartisan Commission on National Elections, headed by Republican Melvin Laird, Democrat Robert Strauss, concluded just last year. Public financing of presidential elections has clearly proved its worth in opening up the process, reducing undue influence of individuals and groups, and virtually ending corruption in election finance. But ironically, at the same time in 1974 that Congress was acting to clean up the presidential races, they refused to clean up their own races, and in fact took 2 deliberate steps that paved the way for the PAC movement in this country. You know, there are some who tell you that the growth of PACs was because of unintended consequences of reform or because of an accident. That is simply hogwash. Congress made two decisions. First, when they created public financing for presidency and not for Congress, the special interest blocked out of presidential races, obviously focused on congressional races. The second thing they did is that business and labor got together, and we know that's a pretty powerful combination, and got passed a special provision allowing for the first time government contractors to set up PACs. Once government contractors were allowed to set up PACs, the explosion took place. Again, this wasn't an accident, and it certainly wasn't a reform. It was a provision that was intended to protect and enhance the role of PACs, and it has. I just want to say again, although it was said in the introduction, I think it is important to really look at this growth of PACs. From 608 PACs in 1974 to 4,000 today. $12.5 million to congressional races in 1974, more than $100 million to congressional candidates in the last election. In 1974, there were a handful of insurance PACs. Today, there are more than 100. There are more than 100 private utility PACs, more than 300 PACs sponsored by labor unions. In addition, PAC money represents a far bigger part of congressional campaigns. Let me just give you one example. In the current Congress, the current House of Representatives, 150 members got more than half of their money from political action committees. And that includes 20 of the 27 party leaders and committee chairmen. The growth of PACs has an increased importance in negative impact in really two parts of the political process. First, elections, congressional elections. Secondly, congressional decision making. Let's look at the election process. First of all, PACs really prevent elections from being as competitive as they should be because they give so heavily to incumbents. As I look out on this audience, I'm sure that there are some of you who have thought of running for Congress, have been approached about running for Congress. Well, if you were to make that decision, and it's a tough decision to make, I'd really want to tell you what you'd face under the current campaign finance system. First of all, PAC funds go to incumbents at a rate of 4.6 to 1. What that means, obviously, is that for every 4.5 PAC dollars that goes to an incumbent, only $1 goes to a challenger. And this advantage for PACs to incumbents is true for all kind of PAC giving, whether it's corporations, labor unions, trade association, membership PACs. In fact, if you look at PAC giving in this country, you wouldn't think there was a Republican Party or a Democratic Party, but an incumbents party. And when you add all the PAC advantages to all of the other advantages enjoyed by incumbents, it's no wonder that in the last 10 years of those incumbent members of the House of Representatives who sought re-election, more than 90% won. If you're an incumbent House member and seek re-election, your chances are 9 to 1. And if you're a challenger, that's 9 to 1 odds against winning. And those are not very good odds in what is supposed to be a competitive process. Senator John Stennis from Mississippi, one of the grand old men of the Senate who cares so deeply about that institution, cited another negative impact of PACs on the election process. Senator Stennis says, PACs tend to push the election machinery away from the people at home, and that's you and me, away from the people at home for whom a representative or senator is being chosen. The PACs step in at a key time with plenty of money and to a degree take over the election. Before I turn to the impact that PACs have on congressional decision making, I want to talk about another problem that's been growing, and that's how campaign money is being spent, how campaign money is being used. House and Senate rules clearly prohibit converting campaign money to personal use. The Tennessean, a newspaper in Nashville, raised serious questions about the use of campaign funds by Representative Bill Boner. The Oregonian, here in Portland, raised serious questions about Representative Jim Weaver's use of campaign funds. Common Cause has called on the Ethics Committee, pressed the Ethics Committee to investigate these allegations, and the Ethics Committee has now undertaken such an investigation. We believe that these need to be fully investigated, thoroughly investigated, and that the Ethics Committee's conclusions and findings must be made public. As we turn to PAC influence in congressional decision-making, I have to say I think this is the most insidious part of the process. It occurs after the election. There's growing awareness. There is growing awareness that PAC money has an impact on legislative decisions. Senator Paul Simon, who is a senator from Illinois and every day participates in the Senate, watches what goes on, and he says there is no question that campaign money has an impact on the conduct of legislators and the content of legislation. Now, whenever I'm asked the question, does campaign money have an impact on congressional decision-making, I'm reminded of a story. And I have to tell you that I stole it from Mo Udall. But the story goes like this. There's a Chicago judge. He walks into the courtroom, he looks at the two opposing attorneys, and he says, "I'd like to see the lawyers in my chambers." The judge goes back and he says to the first lawyer, Joe, you've always been part of the organization in Chicago. You've supported me. You've contributed to my campaign. Turned to the other lawyer. He said, Frank, your father was part of the organization. You, too, are one of my largest campaign contributors. Boys, he said, I can't see any way out of this. I'm afraid I'm going to have to decide this one on the merits. Well, more and more, sadly, Congress is not deciding the issue on the merits. More and more PAC dollars are given by special interest groups to buy special access and influence in Washington. And more people in Washington are buying into the view expressed by the late Justin Dart, chairman of Dart Industries, when he said, dialogue with a politician is a fine thing, but with a little money, they hear you better. Most often, PAC contributions are given with a legislative purpose in mind, and they are tied to organized lobbying. What that means is that the campaign contribution is given, and at the end of that, there's a lobbyist in Washington with a legislative goal. One of the big-time lawyer lobbyists in Washington, Robert McCandless, said recently, and I think this is maybe one of the saddest commentaries on the process overall. Lawyer lobbyist Robert McCandless, I won't even take a client now unless he's willing to set up a political action committee and participate in the campaign contribution process. You know, it used to be that PACs would tell you they got nothing in return for their contributions. They just gave these contributions, and I always imagined that somehow they just disappeared into the Bermuda Triangle. Now it's universally accepted by everyone, including the PACs, that PAC contributions buy access. Well, even if that's all it bought, it would be wrong. The St. Petersburg Times recently said, PAC money buys access, which is the same as putting a price tag on the right of petition established in the First Amendment. But PAC contributions buy more than access. The effects of PAC giving are reflected in Congress everywhere you turn, whether it's in those narrow, specific policy decisions or in broader policy areas, such as government spending, taxation, or health. PACs have become the symbol and the driving force for the ascendancy of the special interest over the general interest in our society. The tax reform fight currently before Congress is a stark example, a classic example of the PAC system. Political action committees gave $6.7 million to members of the Finance and Ways and Means Committee during 1985, not even an election year, during 1985, when both committees were considering comprehensive tax reform legislation. That's nearly 2.5 times what PACs gave to those same members in 1983. Senator Packwood, chairman of the Finance Committee, received nearly $1 million from PACs in 1985. While the jury is still out on whether the American people are going to get an equitable tax system, one thing is crystal clear. Political action committees and members of the Finance and Ways and Means Committee have seen the tax reform bill as a major vehicle for giving and receiving large sums of special interest money. And there's only one explanation for the doubling of PAC money to the tax writing committees. This money's being given by special interest groups in order to assure that they get special advantages in our tax system. PAC gifts don't always guarantee support. PACs don't always win. But the PAC system is a system in which special interest groups are buying access, influence, and oftentimes results in the United States Congress. Now, we step back and we look at the system and we say PACs gave $100 million to congressional candidates. PACs are giving to incumbents more heavily than ever before. Prospects for changing this system would not look very good, would it? After all, the only people who can change the system are the elected officials. They're the ones most deeply mired in the system and who benefit most from it. I'm sure there are a lot of you who are sitting out there who would like to say to me, get another line of work. But I don't bring you a message of gloom and doom. I really don't, because something profound has happened in this country in the last few years. America has begun to decide that there's something inherently wrong with PACs and the PAC system. What's happened in this country, and I travel a lot, and I feel it, and I see it, and I know it, and it's important, and it's fundamental. And that is the development of a growing public awareness and recognition of the fact that the PAC system is a rotten system. It's undermining our democracy. It's got to be changed. We know that concern is rising when Irving Shapiro, former chief executive officer of DuPont and former chairman of the Business Roundtable, calls the current congressional campaign financing system an invidious thing. It's corrupting. It does pollute the system. We know that we're reaching new audiences when Business Week editorializes that PACs are balkanizing the nation's political process as swarms of candidates and well-heeled special interest groups jostle to trade political favors for money. Business Week goes on to say, most see their contributions as an investment in promoting laws favoring their interests. We know the tide is turning on the PAC movement when there's a big headline in the Wall Street Journal that says, conservative support adds momentum to a move by Congress to limit PACs. And there is momentum in Congress. There is momentum as more and more new voices, people who've not spoken out before, are speaking out for change. Reforming the congressional campaign finance system involves a long-term goal of establishing a comprehensive system similar to the presidential public financing system. But the important short-term goal must be to put tough limits on what political action committees can give to candidates. We have to take, really, this year we have to take immediate steps to stop the growth and the power of PACs. There's legislation introduced in this Congress by moderate Democrat David Boren from Oklahoma and Mr. Conservative Barry Goldwater from Arizona, which would do just that. It would place a cap on PACs, and its central provision would put a ceiling on PAC contributions that a member can receive. It has broad bipartisan support. Its co-sponsors span the spectrum from Mississippi Senator John Stennis to Colorado's Gary Hart. from Republican Senator Warren Rudman, a principal sponsor of the Graham-Rudman bill, to Carl Levin, a very liberal Democrat from Michigan. An identical bill has been introduced in the House and is also gathering broad bipartisan support. If this Boren-Goldwater amendment passed, it would have profound impact. If it had been in effect in 1984, it would have cut PAC giving in half for Senate candidates. If it were in effect for this Senate election in Oregon, the PAC limit on what a senator could receive from all PACs would be $200,000. When Senator Boren introduced this bill, frankly, nobody took it seriously. He got a vote on it in December because everyone assumed it would be tabled and it would be killed, but it wasn't. Now, they didn't pass it. I don't bring that kind of good news. They didn't pass it, but they refused to table it. And I think what that means is that the PAC issue is powerful in the country, and senators know it. What the vote meant, the fact that they weren't willing to kill the bill, meant that senators were not willing to go on record, on public record, in favor of PACs. Senators Boren and Goldwater are going to push for another vote this year, and Congress should pass it. Now I want to take just a minute before I close to talk with you about Senator Packwood and the important role that I believe he can play in the campaign finance issue. As I'm sure all of you know, Senator Packwood is the #1 recipient of PACs this year, receiving nearly $1 million. Let me put it a little bit in perspective. We did a study on the first 6 months of 1985 of the Senate Finance Committee. During that time, Senator Packwood himself had raised more money than the entire Senate Finance Committee had raised in a comparable period 2 years before. It's no mystery why Senator Packwood is the #1 PAC recipient. He is chairman of the powerful tax-writing Senate Finance Committee. But if he receives these contributions because of his position as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, he can use that same chairmanship and that same power within Congress to make fundamental changes. The Senate Finance Committee, which has been dubbed PAC Heaven, is what they call the Senate Finance Committee, can be the committee that plays a central role in solving the PAC problem. And this is what you have to know. Any comprehensive campaign finance bill will go to the Senate Finance Committee and will be considered by the Senate Finance Committee. And Senator Packwood will play a central role in this. Senator Packwood should go on record now in favor of fundamental campaign finance reform. The first step Senator Packwood should take is to co-sponsor the Boren-Goldwater Amendment and tell the people here in Oregon and his colleagues in Washington, yes, I am going to do something to change this system. The citizens of Oregon should be asking every single candidate and every single member of Congress, will you co-sponsor the Boren-Goldwater Amendment? Will you support PAC limits? Will you work for a comprehensive approach? And Senator Packwood should be asked specifically, how will you use your Senate Finance Committee to stop the growing power of PACs? Al Hunt of the Wall Street Journal once wrote, sweeping changes are called for only in rare moments. But when Congress can legitimately be labeled the best money can buy, one of those moments has arrived. We believe that such a moment has arrived. PACs are squeezing the life out of our representative form of government, and it's time to draw the line. We know there are members of Congress who care deeply about this issue and are willing to fight the battle. Members of both parties, conservatives, liberals. We know there are many other members of Congress who strongly object to it. We also know that this is an uphill fight. This is a battle to change the way power is exercised in this country, and there are no more tough battles. We know that this is a battle that can be won because we saw it happen in 1974 when the presidency was taken off the auction block. But most of all, and that's what I have to say to you, most of all, this fight is not going to be won in Washington. It's only going to be won when the civic leaders, like those of you who are in this room, and the citizens of Oregon and the citizens all over this country, stand up and say to our members of Congress, enough is enough. We're headed for a showdown on this issue in Congress. We hope the battle will take place this year. It will be extremely difficult. The PACs have an enormous stake in using all of their clout to maintain the current system. But it may be that the toughest part of the battle has been won. The PAC system is discredited in this country today. It's rejected by the public, and it's becoming an ever-widening stain on the standing of the Congress and the integrity of its members. I hope you'll join in this fight because it really is a fight worth fighting. At stake here is the very essence of our representative form of government. And the public's going to insist, you and I are going to insist, I believe, on a government whose obligations are first and foremost to the people of this country, not the PACs. Thank you very much.
We will move now to the question and answer period. We'll set up a microphone in the center of the room. Only members of the City Club may pose questions. The first question from Bob Holdridge, board host today.
Although more difficult to organize, if the PACs were eliminated or restricted, my guess would be that the special interest groups would simply ask their members to donate directly to elected officials with a strong note of instruction enclosed. Therefore, what would be gained?
Well, first of all, there are ways to prevent what is actually going on some with PACs today, which is called a bundling practice, where PACs actually take individual contributions and then deliver them to the candidate, get credit for it, and yet it doesn't fit in with the current PAC limits. We believe that first of all, PACs should be limited and their power because they are tied to this special interest lobbying, and we think that legislation can be passed which would prevent PACs from organizing this money and getting credit for it. We think individual contributions must play an important part in any kind of a mixed system, and in a system where you place a reasonable overall limit on PACs, you allow a role for individual contributions, and later perhaps put some kind of alternative system that it would be a balanced system and that you in fact could prevent the kind of thing that you're talking about. Oh, there are other questions.
Ready for the next question? Thank you. Please identify yourself.
Rodney Stevens, I'm a member. There is a gun control bill before Congress now, generally considered by many to weaken gun control. The National Rifle Association, which has invariably opposed gun control, is supporting this strongly. I wonder if you would be in a position to comment on this. For example, all of our Oregon House representatives and all but 2 of Washington's are supporting this bill, in other words, agreeing with NRA. Do you know whether there is money, possibly in the form of a PAC or PACs, as well as member support behind this very disproportionate influence that NRA exerts on the Congress?
Yes, well, Common Cause is not involved in this battle specifically, but in fact, the NRA is a very large campaign contributor, and there was a study done not by Common Cause, but another group which showed a strong relationship, which we've done in other cases, between PAC contributions and votes on gun control. Certainly, they also do a lot of lobbying, but PAC money is a very powerful force in this battle that is going on in Congress. And again, the question is not how one feels on the issue, either for or against a particular issue, but the fact is that when large money enters into it, it skews the process and really prevents public decisions being made in the way that they should be. The simple answer is yes, the NRA gives lots of political action committee money.
I'm Don Sterling, a member. In Oregon, the Oregon Supreme Court overturned a state law limiting campaign contributions. I think not respect to PACs, but just contribution, on the grounds that it was an infringement of freedom of speech. What would be the constitutional chances of a limit on PAC spending in the light of the rights of freedom of speech and freedom of association?
It's a good question. When the campaign finance law was passed in '74, which limited what an individual PAC could give, not an aggregate limit, it also established the public financing system. The Supreme Court heard this case in a landmark case called Buckley versus Vallejo. And in this case, the Supreme Court came down on the side that you could limit contributions. They said you couldn't limit spending except in a public financing system, but you could limit contributions because they said the corrupting power of large campaign contributions, whether from large individual contributions or large PAC contributions, has the potential for corruption and actual corruption, and the balance came down that it was not an infringement of freedom of speech because of the corrupting influence on the political process. These new limits we are proposing, we believe, are in fact exactly in line of what the Supreme Court ruled, and that they would be constitutional.
Eloise Carson, City Club member. If spending is limited by law, how do you handle a situation of special interest groups doing independent spending against a candidate in certain races?
Yeah. This was one of the things in the Supreme Court decision that they said that independent spending separate from the candidate's campaign could not be limited, and that's the question a good question that you're addressing. Part of the Boren-Goldwater Amendment would provide, although it does not place limits on spending, it's a PAC limit bill, it would provide free response time for those candidates who are the subject of independent expenditures. The head of one independent expenditure group talked about what they did, which is usually go out early, attack a candidate, and then leave. And this is Terry Dolan, and he said a group like ours could lie through its teeth and the candidate it helps stays clean. So there's some way we have to deal with this problem. The Boren-Goldwater Amendment would provide free response time on television for any candidate who is attacked by independent expenditures. And we think that that's a protection. You can't stop independent expenditures because of the Supreme Court ruling, but this would give the candidate who's being hurt by it the chance to answer the charges, the chance on television not only to have to fight his opponent's campaign, but the independent spending that is going on as well.
Jack Brown, member. Other than public financing, do you have a suggestion on how we involve more Americans in the process and in financing and using their individual dollars to finance election campaigns? I
think the question of individual contributions and an individual participation is important in a mixed kind of system where you limit PAC money. One of the things that's has happened is that in 1982, those incumbents who were elected in the House received more in PAC money for the first time than they did in small individual contributions. One way to do it would be some way through, perhaps through the tax system with some kind of credit. But one of the key things you can't do is have a tax credit by itself. Absolutely you cannot do it. It benefits incumbents further, and it really, without other restrictions, without PAC restrictions, it would really be further detrimental. So one thing would be a package that could have PAC limits. You have to have PAC limits. You have to deal directly with the PAC problem. PAC limits, some kind of response time, and some kind of alternative source of money. But I want to tell you this, in terms of any proposal that is presented to you by a candidate, by a member of Congress, that doesn't deal directly with the PAC question, You can't solve the PAC question just by enhancing small contributions. We have got to limit it. It is probably the biggest growth industry in America today, and we have to limit it if we're going to get our government back. So we're always open to looking for ways for involving the small individual contributor, but don't be fooled by anyone who tells you that we can solve this problem without limiting PACs, because that's got to be the first step. Yes, sir.
Dan Saltzman. There's a conventional line of thought in Oregon politics, one that I think Senator Packwood subscribes to, that if you were to limit campaign contributions from PACs to $200,000, that there wouldn't be a Senator Packwood. Now, given that, how do you suggest, or how can we realistically expect Senator Packwood to co-sponsor this amendment, the Boren-Goldwater amendment, and also what kind of response have you had from Senator Packwood to date in your meetings with him on this?
Okay. First of all, I believe that Senator Packwood and other senators could live under that kind of PAC limitation. I think you would go to your individual voters, and then I think once you limited it, we could come up with an alternative source of money. I think it's a very sad state of affairs if we are saying if you limit PACs, there is no Senator Packwood. Frankly, I just don't believe that. I think that it would be we are going to members of Congress, and we are asking them to do a very difficult thing. We're saying, you're really doing great under this system. You're raising $4.50 for every one your opponent gets, and we're asking you to change it. So it's very difficult to get members of Congress to do this. But more and more people inside Congress are speaking out. And the reason that I feel like we can ask Senator Packwood, the reason I feel like we can ask every member of Congress to support this is because this is a rotten, corrupt system that's destroying our representative form of government. And members of Congress should be able to rise out of self-interest and support some change that benefits the American people. More and more in Congress are doing it, and that's why I have not given up on the fact that Senator Packwood can also do it. I've not spoken with him recently on this, although we are seeking to see him and talk to him about this issue, and to ask him to co-sponsor Boren-Goldwater and to make a commitment as chairman of the Finance Committee to do something about it. There will be senators under a PAC limit. It is possible. We know the presidential system can work, and we also know that more and more members are speaking out, are willing to put their name on the line, and we hope the Oregon delegation will join them.
Jack Baker, City Club member. I suppose you get some dumb questions now and then, and this may be one, but
I also give some dumb answers, so we're even.
we have limited the term of the president to 2 terms. And here in Multnomah County, we've limited the term of county elected officials to 2 terms. In the interest of greater representation and to eliminate perhaps the obvious advantage an incumbent has, is there any thought anywhere that you know of limiting the terms of the houses of Congress?
There's a lot of thought to it, but very little thought to it in Congress.
Lisa Haler, member of the City Club. $100 million is hard to contemplate. I wonder if, from as much as you know about PACs, how many of those cancel each other out? If you have 2 interest groups on opposite sides of the issue, both of them giving PAC money, certainly in some occasions they must cancel each other out, which would be a comfort to those of us who think of these big numbers.
Well, the question of whether PACs cancel each other out, sadly, I think that's the very rare case, because very many times, for instance, in the tax bill and other places, it's a very narrow interest where you have a number of PACs getting together, and if there are 100 insurance PACs, theoretically each can give $5,000. That would be $500,000 from insurance alone. As Bob Dole again said, there's not a poor PAC. There's not a food stamp PAC. There are not people on the other side in terms of political action committees. Another thing that's happened in Congress is that sort of the traditional people who balance each other out, business and labor, that's sort of the classic case, that increasingly on things like maritime policy, trucking regulation, clean air standards. You find the maritime industry, the unions, and the corporations working on the same side. You find GM working with the UAW to try and prevent clean air standards on cars. And you find the truckers and the Teamsters working together. And so there is very little of this kind of balancing going on. And in fact, the multiple kinds of special interest don't make up the general interest. There's something bigger than that that is the general interest, and it's what we intuitively know of as Americans, and that's not what's getting addressed. The fact is that what we've done by these number of PACs is not cancel each other out, but give you 100 private utility PACs that are working together. And so it's got to be stopped. And that's what we're working on. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get carried away. Yeah.
I'm Ray Polani, member of the City Club. There are obviously a few other democracies in this world, and I wonder if they experience the same problem, and if they have thought of solutions, and if there are some other solutions. Do you at Common Cause know of this, and if so, what would they be? Could they apply to our democracy, or if you don't, shouldn't it be perhaps looked at? Why should we reinvent the wheel, maybe?
I don't know. I know that there's often proposals in terms of limiting the time of campaigns in much the way the British system does. I don't know that there are the same kind of system, same kinds of problems in a parliamentary system, which is obviously most of your European countries. I don't think there's the same kind of problem, but always I think we should look at the best of what we have and look at others to see if there are other solutions. So I welcome your suggestion. Thank you.
There are no other questions? One more, please.
Well, to piggyback on that is Tom Question City Club. Could there simply be an upper limit on the amount of financing?
A spending limit?
Yes, a spending limit.
Well, that's a good question. Again, we go back to the Supreme Court decision, which someone raised earlier. The Supreme Court said you can limit PAC contributions, you can limit individual contributions, but you can't place an overall limit on spending unless it's part of a voluntary public financing system. And that's why our long-term goal that I discussed would have PAC limits, voluntary public financing, and spending limits. But without some kind of public financing system, there can't just be straight spending limits be put on. But that should be a long-term goal. But I don't think we're going to get this more comprehensive reform until we limit PACs.
May I have a second bite?
Please.
No fair.
Don Sterling again. One of the things that Senator Packwood has announced that he's going to do is to take some of his campaign money and pass it on to other local candidates. What is your comment on that practice?
My comment on that, from having been here a couple of days, is that's a fairly controversial proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ann McBride, and I'd like to remind you of the important vote next week on the regional government report. We are adjourned.
Well, very well done.
Thank you.